Hello everybody, in today's video I'm going to be showing y'all 10 essential note-taking tips that I think are very important for making your school notes. So let's get started. So my first tip is to use abbreviations or symbols. Time is an important factor in note-taking. So how about you write your words quickly, but you will still understand them with these abbreviations or symbols. There are many abbreviations or symbols that you can do. You can even make your own ones up. However, don't use too many because in the end, when you're trying to understand what you're writing, it will be hard to decipher each and every single one of your abbreviations or symbols. However, it's still a good step if you want to write your notes quickly because it will shorten the words that you want to write. Here are some of my most popular and most used abbreviations and symbols. I especially like the increase and decrease at the end, which is just an up and down arrow. Tip number 2 is to leave some space in the margins. The margin is a space that we don't necessarily look at a lot. But honestly, it can include a lot of different information that we didn't really think of. What I like to do is when I've written my notes, I want to go back to revising them. I like to write questions or add extra detail. Let me explain. So if I add questions, the next time I revise, I can also test myself. In terms of the detail, I add like little terms that are not necessarily fully related to the subject, but are still kind of connected. Here are a few examples of what I mean. Tip number 3 is to leave some space at the end. Just like the margins, I feel like the end of the page is something we don't necessarily look at in order to differentiate some things or just to add some little things to help us in the future. What I like to do is I like to add a summary at the end. So when I'm last minute revising, I can just read that information and instantly know what the entire page was about. It's also a good idea to box it out to make it stand out so you can easily find out where this summary was in the future. Tip number 4 is probably my favorite step and is to make the title stand out. I really like this step because making the title is always a fun part of making notes. In fact, it's probably my favorite step because you have to put in a lot of creativity in order to make it stand out. But the main reason for this tip is so when you're looking at your notes or revising, you will easily know what the entire page is about. However, if you write it just like your normal body text, then you won't really have a clue what the entire page is about. My personal favorite for the title is just to brush letter it and then highlight the ends of it, if that makes sense. Tip number 5 is important when you're revising or recapping your notes, and it's to include an exam question. I think this step is important because when you're learning, you gotta test yourself as well, which is also part of active learning, I think. So what you're gonna do is you're just gonna look up a past paper for whatever notes you're making. So for example, if I was searching up GCSE, then I'll just search up GCSE past paper. Make sure it's for your exam board. Then what you're gonna do is you're gonna find a question that you think is challenging. And you're gonna also write the number of marks that you need to achieve. You can also include an answer somewhere, but not necessarily directly under it. Otherwise, you wouldn't really be learning as you will just read that. Tip number 6 is to use post-it notes to add extra information. I feel like post-it notes are a very important piece of stationery as you can just stick it anywhere without the need for glue, and it will still stand out because it will be entirely different color to the page. You can use this to add terms or definitions, but what I like to do is I like to write a question on the front and then the answer on the back. This way you can test yourself. Tip number 7 is to use different notebooks for different subjects. Even though this is a given, some people still use one notebook for more than 2 subjects. I know that this may be up to your financial status to see if you can afford as many notebooks as for each subject that you're taking, but I feel like it's important to differentiate what information goes for which subject, and it will definitely make your life much easier when you're revising. Here are some examples, I guess, of 3 of my notebooks. For biology, chemistry, and physics, although they're all sciences, I'm still including them in 3 different notebooks. Here's also kind of like a flip through to see if I'm using any of the tips that I mentioned in this video. Tip number 8 is similar to the previous tip, and it's to color code for each subject. This one is also related to differentiation of each information of each subject. So what I like to do is not only do I use a separate notebook for each subject, but I also only use one color of highlighter or pen in that notebook. Here's what I mean. So what I do is I assign a highlighter color to a subject, and whenever I'm revising or doing anything related to that subject, I will use that color, and overall I have one color scheme of like what subject goes to what color. And yeah. Tip number 9 is to use a different color pen to make things stand out. What I mean is when you're revising or recapping your notes, it will stand out the most when you're revising, making you look out for it in your exam. Say there's an important word or there's like a term that you need to remember. Then just write it in a different color, and you can still keep your color scheme. So if the highlighter for your notebook is purple, then just use a purple pen. Or you can just highlight on top of the word if you don't want to get a color pen. It still works and it still makes it stand out. Finally, the last tip, tip number 10, is to use diagrams. Diagrams are especially important if you're a visual learner, and if you don't know what that means, you can watch my last video. Basically, what you're going to do is you're just going to draw anything that's related to what you're doing. Tables, charts, bar graphs, literally anything that will help you study and make you understand what you're talking about. And it can just be like a little earth if you're doing geography, like the language if you're doing languages. You can even annotate and label them in order to help you even more.